Hello everyone. I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. Story 1. In 2023, a retired homicide detective in Portland was clearing out the basement of a foreclosed home when he stumbled on something that made his blood run cold. A meticulously organized collection of 148 police evidence boxes, each stolen from unsolved murder cases spanning 40 years. Every box contained crime scene photos, victim clothing, and handwritten notes, none of which had ever been released to the public. But the most disturbing part? A fresh box sat on the workbench, labeled with a date 2 weeks in the future. The rain in Portland had been falling for 3 straight days when retired Detective Alan Griggs unlocked the side door of the Old Craftsman on Alder Street. The bank had repossessed it months earlier, and his nephew, who worked foreclosure cleanouts, had asked him to help dig through the clutter in the basement. Griggs wasn't expecting much. Probably old newspapers, busted furniture, maybe a few boxes of tax records left behind by whoever owned the place. But when he descended the narrow stairs, the smell hit him first: damp concrete, mildew, and something sharper, metallic, that made the hair rise on the back of his neck. His flashlight beam swept across the basement and froze. Stacked along the far wall were dozens of identical brown evidence boxes, each stenciled with a black number, an evidence tag, and the familiar Property of Portland Police Bureau seal. Griggs stepped closer, his pulse quickening. Every homicide detective knew those boxes, heavy-duty corrugated cardboard meant to last decades in the evidence locker. The kind you needed a signed request to even look inside. And there weren't just a few of them here. There were rows, 5 deep, and every one was labeled with a victim's name and a case number, except one. It sat on a scarred wooden workbench. Apart from the others, the cardboard newer, the handwriting fresh and bold in black marker. Case hashtag, none. Victim, unknown. Date, October 29, 2023. Griggs frowned. That date was 2 weeks from today. He popped the lid. Inside was a neatly folded red windbreaker, the kind you'd buy at a thrift store. Beneath it, an envelope marked photos. He slipped on gloves and opened it. 6 photographs spilled out, each glossy and recent. They showed a young woman, mid-20s maybe, smiling at various locations in Portland. Waiting at a bus stop, sipping coffee outside a bakery, standing at a crosswalk. In every shot, she seemed unaware she was being photographed. In the final image, she wasn't smiling. She was walking down a narrow alley at night, looking over her shoulder, eyes wide. Beneath the photos lay a digital recorder. Griggs pressed play. A man's voice spoke softly, almost like he was narrating to himself. Day 6. She's changing her route. Almost like she knows. 2 more weeks. The recording ended. Griggs stared at the wall of boxes. The names he recognized instantly, victims from Portland's most stubborn cold cases. Tina Merrick, 1984. George Whitman, 1991. Alicia Song, 2002. And dozens more. Cases that had gone cold in his own time on the force. He pulled one down. Case hashtag 84-197, and cracked the lid. Inside was the entire file. Police reports, witness statements, autopsy photos, even a Polaroid of Tina Merrick taken at the scene. None of this should be here. All of it should be locked in the PPB's evidence facility miles away. Someone had been collecting them. Someone with deep access. And the box on the workbench wasn't about the past. It was a blueprint for a murder that hadn't happened yet. Griggs felt the old adrenaline kick in, the same rush he'd felt walking into fresh crime scenes. He took out his phone and started to dial the bureau. But then his flashlight flickered, and he heard it. The creak of a floorboard above him. Someone else was in the house. The floorboard creaked again, slow, deliberate. Not the random groan of an old house. Griggs' instincts kicked in. He killed his flashlight and let the basement sink into darkness, his ears straining. Whoever was up there had weight in their step. Not a raccoon, not a cat. Human. He slipped his phone back into his pocket. Calling 911 would mean speaking, and speaking meant giving away his position. Instead, he scanned the basement by memory: shelves to the left, old furnace near the center, a narrow set of stairs leading back up to the kitchen. One way in, one way out. He needed an edge. Griggs reached for the nearest object, one of the evidence boxes, but froze. If this guy was tied to these boxes, damaging one might be the last mistake he made. His hand shifted to a heavy, rusted wrench hanging on a pegboard. It felt solid in his grip. A shadow moved at the top of the basement stairs. Then a voice, deep and calm. "You shouldn't be down there." Griggs stayed silent. The shadow shifted, and a tall figure began descending slowly, step by step. The man was dressed in dark work clothes, gloves on his hands. His face stayed in the shadows. "Those boxes, they're mine." Griggs tightened his grip on the wrench. "They're police property. You've got about 3 seconds to tell me who you are before." The man reached the last step. The light from the basement window finally hit his face. He was older, late 50s maybe, but strong, with deep lines etched around his eyes. Something about him rang faint bells in Griggs' memory, but he couldn't place it. The man smiled faintly. "You used to be good at this. But you're slow now. I've been standing in that kitchen for 5 minutes watching you snoop." Griggs kept the wrench raised. "These cases, how did you get them?" The man ignored the question. He stepped toward the workbench, glancing at the unmarked box. His gloved hand brushed the red windbreaker like it was precious. "She's not ready yet." Griggs' pulse spiked. "The woman in the photos, where is she?" The man's eyes flicked to him, flat and cold. "You don't get to ask questions." "Not yet." Griggs lunged forward, aiming for his arm, but the man was fast, faster than someone his age should be. He caught the wrench mid-swing, twisted it from Griggs' grip, and sent it clattering to the floor. The two locked eyes for a tense moment. Then the man did something unexpected. He stepped back, letting go entirely. "Walk away, detective. Forget what you saw. If you don't, you'll end up in one of those boxes." He turned and climbed the stairs, his boots heavy on the wood. The front door opened, then slammed shut. Griggs rushed up after him, but by the time he reached the porch, the man was gone. Rain pounded the street. No car in sight. When Griggs went back inside, the workbench was empty. The box with no case file was gone. The house felt different without the man in it, emptier, but sharper somehow, like every shadow was leaning toward him. Griggs stood in the kitchen, dripping rainwater onto the linoleum, trying to piece together what had just happened. The unmarked box was gone. The photographs, the recorder, the red windbreaker, all vanished with the stranger. But the other boxes were still there in the basement, silent sentinels of decades-old murders. Griggs grabbed the nearest one off the shelf, case hashtag 91-442 George Whitman, and set it on the workbench. If he could find anything about how these got here, maybe he could figure out who Gloves was. Inside, the evidence was meticulously organized, far cleaner than he remembered from his days on the force. Witness statements in chronological order, evidence bags labeled in the same neat handwriting, photographs sealed in plastic sleeves. And at the bottom, something that definitely didn't belong to the official record, a black leather-bound notebook. No markings on the cover, no label. He flipped it open. The first page was written in blocky, deliberate handwriting. The ledger. Each following page listed names, victims, case numbers, and beside them, in red ink, dates. Not the dates of their deaths, but the dates the boxes had been collected. Tina Merrick, November 12, 1997. George Whitman, April 3, 2004. Alicia Song, June 15, 2012. Griggs' stomach tightened. Whoever this man was, he had been acquiring these boxes for over 2 decades. He turned the page and froze. At the bottom of the next list was the name. Victim, unknown, November 12, 2023. That was 8 days from now. And beneath that, in smaller handwriting, was something even stranger. The list must be complete before the reckoning. Griggs flipped further ahead, but the rest of the pages were blank, until the very last one, where a single sentence was written. If you're reading this, you're already on it. A floorboard creaked again, but this time, it wasn't coming from inside the house. It was outside, along the side yard, slow and measured, like someone walking just beyond the windows. Griggs slipped the ledger into his jacket and moved toward the front door. The rain was still coming down hard, the street empty. But as he scanned the yard, something caught his eye, wedged under the windshield wiper of his car. It was one of the photographs from the missing box. The young woman again, only this time, the picture was different. She wasn't walking down an alley. She was standing in a cemetery. And in the blurry background, partially hidden by a gravestone, was him. The man from the basement. Rain slicked the photo between Griggs' fingers, the droplets beating on its glossy surface. He shielded it under the porch light to study every inch. The woman, dark hair, mid-20s, stood stiffly among crooked gravestones, her hands clasped in front of her like she'd been told not to move. Her eyes were fixed off camera, not at whoever had taken the picture. She looked uneasy. And then there was him. Half hidden behind a weathered granite cross, the man from the basement watched her. Not with curiosity, with possession. The photo had that off-balance, handheld framing Griggs had seen before, amateur enough to seem careless, but careful in the details. The kind of image someone takes when they're keeping a record. Griggs flipped it over. On the back, in the same blocky handwriting as the ledger, was a location scrawled in thick black marker. Miller's Grove Cemetery. No date, no explanation. It was nearly midnight when Griggs pulled up to Miller's Grove. The rain had slowed to a fine mist, but the air still carried that damp, metallic bite that seeped into his bones. The cemetery gate stood ajar, the lock dangling broken from its chain. The place was small, maybe 50 graves, surrounded by a wall of pines that swallowed the moonlight. Griggs moved slowly, flashlight low, boots crunching on gravel. Halfway down the center path, he saw it. The same crooked granite cross from the photo. He scanned the area. The ground here was softer, patchy, like it had been dug up recently. A fresh mound of earth lay just behind the cross, no marker in sight. Something glinted near the base. Griggs crouched and brushed away wet leaves to reveal a small silver locket. Inside, instead of a picture, was a tightly folded scrap of paper. He unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was smaller here, but still that same deliberate print. 8 days. Do not interfere. Before Griggs could process the message, his flashlight flickered, then died entirely. And in the darkness, from somewhere between the graves, a man's voice spoke low and close. "Detective, you brought the ledger, didn't you?" Griggs' pulse surged at the voice. Gravel shifted somewhere to his left, then again to his right, like the man was circling him in the dark. He slipped the folded note into his pocket and kept his own voice steady. "Who are you?" Silence. Then, the crunch of a footstep directly behind him. Griggs spun, hand instinctively reaching for the revolver at his hip. The beam of a distant streetlight barely cut through the pines, painting the figure in fractured shadow. The faint outline of gloves. "You shouldn't be here yet," the man said softly. His tone was almost disappointed. "You weren't meant to see her." Griggs kept the gun low but ready. "The woman in the photo. Where is she?" The man tilted his head, as if considering whether to answer. "She's safe. For now. But you," he stepped forward, and the beam caught his face just enough to show the corner of a smile. "You've put yourself on the wrong page of the ledger." Griggs' grip tightened. "What's in the box you took from the basement?" Instead of answering, the man crouched, picked something up from the wet grass, and tossed it at Griggs' feet. It landed with a dull, soft thud. A Polaroid camera, old and worn, the type with the rainbow stripe across the front. "Take it," the man said. "If you're going to follow me, you'll need to see what I see." Before Griggs could move, the man stepped backward into the shadows, his outline dissolving into the tree line. Griggs ran forward, sweeping the flashlight beam, but the cemetery was empty again, just rows of stones, the mist curling over them like breath. When he looked down, he realized the Polaroid camera wasn't empty. A fresh photograph was still developing, the chemical sheen swirling in green and purple. He shook it gently, and the image began to sharpen. It was the same granite cross, taken from the exact spot where he now stood. Only in this picture, he wasn't alone. Standing beside him, smiling faintly at the camera, was the young woman from the photograph, and she was holding the same Polaroid camera in her hands. The image in Griggs' hands finished developing, and for a long moment, he forgot to breathe. The woman's posture was relaxed, almost intimate, her shoulder angled toward him, her free hand brushing the edge of his coat. But Griggs knew two impossible things. She wasn't there when the photo was taken. The picture had been taken moments ago. The background matched perfectly, the crooked granite cross, the lopsided row of headstones, the slick grass underfoot. But in this photo, she was smiling in a way that made his stomach turn, like she knew something he didn't. He flipped it over. On the back, in the same thick black marker he'd seen on the cemetery photograph, was a single word: return. By the time Griggs got back to his car, the mist had thickened into a fog bank, swallowing the road in both directions. He shoved the Polaroid camera into the passenger seat, its presence making the cabin feel smaller, heavier. He drove toward town, headlights cutting through the fog like dull knives. When he reached his house, he noticed something he didn't like. The upstairs light was on. Griggs hadn't turned it on. Gun in hand, he moved through the house slowly, clearing each room with the quiet precision of an old habit. The smell hit him before he reached the bedroom: old paper and something faintly metallic. On his bed sat a shoebox. It wasn't his. Inside, neatly stacked, were 10 more Polaroids. Each showed a different location around town: the diner, the elementary school playground, the bridge over Clear Creek. In every one, the woman was there, sometimes in the background, sometimes front and center, always looking directly into the lens. But one photo made him stop cold. It was his own living room. Tonight. The clock in the picture read 9:42 p.m., just 3 hours earlier. He was in the shot, standing in the doorway, looking confused, and over his shoulder, in the blurry background, the man from the cemetery loomed. The last Polaroid in the stack was blank, just white, undeveloped paper. But someone had scrawled across it in marker: tomorrow, Miller's Bridge. Midnight. Come alone. Miller's Bridge was the kind of place kids dared each other to cross after dark, a rotting span of weathered planks and rusted iron bolts stretching over Clear Creek's black water. By the time Griggs arrived, the fog was so thick the bridge looked like it floated in nothing. Midnight came and went. The only sound was the slow groan of the current beneath him. He was about to step off when a soft click echoed from the far side. A camera. Griggs froze, hand brushing the grip of his revolver. "I'm here," he called into the mist. Another click. This time closer. The fog shifted, and a figure emerged, tall, the same lean silhouette from the cemetery, gloved hands cradling the old Polaroid camera. The man raised it, framed Griggs in the lens, and snapped another shot. "Why?" Griggs demanded. "Why me?" The man tilted his head. "Because you're the last box." He tossed something to the wooden planks between them, a photograph still developing. Griggs didn't pick it up. "Where's the woman?" "She's not a woman," the man said calmly. "She's the beginning. The first picture I ever took. And the only one I could never file away." He stepped closer, boots creaking on the boards. "They all have a place. Every one. But yours has been empty for too long." Griggs' heart pounded. "If you think I'm going to let you..." The man suddenly flung the camera into the creek. The splash echoed in the fog. "No more pictures," he said softly. "Just this one." He nodded toward the developing photograph on the boards. "You'll understand when it's ready." Then he stepped backward into the fog, vanishing as quietly as he had appeared. Griggs finally picked up the Polaroid. The image was still milky, the shapes vague and ghostly. As it cleared, his stomach twisted. It wasn't a picture of the bridge. It was his own basement. And in the center, lit by a single dangling bulb, was a cardboard evidence box with his name written across the side. Griggs didn't sleep that night. He sat in his armchair with the bridge photograph balanced on his knee, staring at his own basement frozen in grainy Polaroid gloss. The box in the picture was ordinary, brown, taped at the edges, but the handwriting on the side was unmistakable. It wasn't just his name. It was his full name, complete with middle initial, written in the same blocky black marker that labeled every one of the collector's stolen evidence boxes. By 4:12 a.m., he was standing at the top of his basement stairs. He hadn't been down here in months. The smell hit him first, damp concrete, mildew, and something faintly chemical. Halfway down, he flicked the chain to the single hanging bulb. The light wavered. There, in the center of the room, sat the box. It hadn't been there yesterday. Griggs approached slowly, revolver in one hand, the other hovering over the lid. The tape was fresh, edges crisp. He slid it open with his pocket knife. Inside was a stack of Polaroids, bound with twine. On top of the stack was a folded piece of yellow legal paper. 2 words were written on it. "Start here." He untied the bundle. The first photograph was of himself as a child, 7 years old, sitting on the curb in front of his parents' house, holding a red toy truck. The date scrawled on the bottom, May 14, 1968. Griggs blinked. He had no memory of anyone taking that picture. The next Polaroid showed him at 13, leaning against a chain-link fence outside his middle school. Then him at 20, in uniform, boarding a patrol car. Each image marked with a date, each one from a different year of his life. The pictures continued, dozens of them, until the last one stopped him cold. It was the same photo from Miller's Bridge the night before, only this one had fully developed. The angle was slightly different, lower, closer, like the photographer had been crouching right beside his boots. In the bottom corner, written in smaller letters than before, was a final message. "The last photo is tomorrow." Griggs didn't bother calling the department. By now he knew this was personal. Whatever game the collector was playing had been going on for decades, and it was aimed squarely at him. The message on the Polaroid, "The last photo is tomorrow," wasn't a threat in the traditional sense. It was a deadline. He spent the entire day pacing his kitchen, blinds half closed, revolver on the table. Every creak of the house made him check the windows. The box with his name sat in the middle of the floor like a trap he'd already stepped into. By nightfall, he knew he wouldn't sleep. At 11:47 p.m., the phone rang. Static. Then a voice. Familiar. "You still have the bridge photo?" Griggs didn't answer. "Good. Bring it to the old rail yard. South side, where the switch tower used to be. I'm not playing your..." "You've been in every picture I've ever taken," the voice cut in. "Even before you knew I existed. This is the last one. And then you'll understand why all the others had to happen." The line went dead. The rail yard was deserted when he arrived, the rusted tracks slick with dew, the switch tower a crumbling silhouette in the dark. A single halogen work light hung from a nail, casting a pale circle on the ground. He stepped into the light. The sound came from behind him. Griggs turned. The man stood 10 feet away, Polaroid camera raised, his gloved finger on the shutter. "Why me?" Griggs asked, voice low. "Because you were there," the man said. "The first scene. The first body. You don't remember, but you were a child, and you saw everything. I kept you in the frame all these years so you wouldn't disappear like the rest." Griggs felt his grip tighten on the revolver. "You killed them." "I archived them," the man corrected. "You're the only one still living." He snapped the final picture. The camera whirred, spit out the square. The man stepped forward and placed it in Griggs' hand. "You'll see the truth when it clears," he said. "And then you'll know where to find me." Before Griggs could raise his gun, the man slipped into the shadows between the rusted cars, gone. Griggs looked down at the Polaroid. The milky image began to fade into focus. It wasn't the rail yard. It was a small room. Cinder block walls. A single light bulb overhead. And in the center, tied to a chair, was a boy, no more than 7, holding a red toy truck. The Polaroid shook in Griggs' hands, not from the night air but from something deeper, an old, cold current surging up from a place he hadn't touched in decades. The boy in the picture wasn't just any boy. It was him. 7 years old. Red toy truck. Same haircut, same chipped front tooth. Only now the photo was wrong. His smile was gone. His eyes were wide, glassy, as if he'd already seen something he shouldn't have. He didn't remember this moment being captured. He didn't remember the room at all. But the image had the stubborn, undeniable weight of a memory that had been locked away for good reason. By dawn, Griggs was driving north, Polaroid on the passenger seat, heading toward the only place he'd ever known, with cinderblock walls and a bare bulb overhead, the basement of his childhood church. The building was abandoned now, boarded up, the steeple leaning like a broken neck. He forced the side door and descended into the basement. The smell hit first, damp wood, mold, and something metallic that lingered under it all. The room from the Polaroid was here. Same layout. Same bulb. But empty. Almost. In the center of the floor sat another box. This one was different, older, water-stained, the tape brittle. His name was still there, but underneath it, in smaller, almost trembling handwriting, were the words, "From the first scene." He opened it. Inside were crime scene photos he'd never seen before. A woman, early 20s, lying on the concrete floor of this very basement. The date on the police marker, May 14, 1968, the same date as the first Polaroid in the box from Chapter 8. Tucked among the photos was a church bulletin, yellowed with age. On the back, in the blank space under the announcements, someone had written, "You were there when I was made. You saw me take her. You watched from the stairs. And you smiled." Griggs' stomach turned. He had been here that day. He remembered playing with his truck while his mother cleaned upstairs. But the rest, what he saw, had been scrubbed from his mind, replaced by the soft blur of childhood forgetfulness. Behind him, the bulb flickered. A voice came from the shadows near the door. "Familiar. I took the photos to keep you honest," the man said. "To remind you where your life began." Griggs turned slowly. The man from the rail yard stood in the doorway, camera hanging at his chest. "Why me?" Griggs asked again, his voice cracking now. "Because," the man said, stepping into the light, "you were the first witness. And soon you'll be the last." The shutter clicked. The world went white. Story 2. The envelope was already on Detective Mara Ellison's desk when she came in Monday morning. No return address. No postage. Just her name, printed in neat block letters with a fine-tip pen. Inside was a single postcard. It wasn't new, its corners were frayed, the image faded. It showed a quaint fishing pier she recognized from somewhere, but couldn't place. Across the front, in red marker, was a single line. "You missed one." There was no signature, no handwriting on the back, nothing that would tell her who sent it. Ellison stared at it longer than she should have. The phrase lodged in her mind like a splinter. She hadn't missed anything, at least not recently. The only open file on her desk was a missing persons case from last month. Angela Parr, 34, last seen leaving a night shift at the Riverview Motel. She locked the postcard in her desk and spent the morning going through Parr's case again. At lunch, her phone buzzed. A private number. When she answered, the voice was male, quiet, deliberate. "You'll find her where the pier used to be." Then he hung up. It wasn't until she was halfway out the door, postcard in her pocket, that she remembered why the image looked familiar. The pier had been torn down 10 years ago after a fire. Nothing remained but charred pilings jutting out of the water like black teeth. She reached the site just as the tide was pulling out. Something pale was tangled in the rocks beneath what had once been the pier's main platform. For a moment she thought it was driftwood. Then she saw the hair. The body was wedged between two barnacle-crusted boulders, the tide working against the crime scene text like a relentless clock. Mara Ellison stood on the slick rocks above, the postcard clenched in her jacket pocket as if it might float away if she let it go. The remains were mostly skeletal, but enough skin and muscle clung to the bones to suggest the body hadn't been there for more than a few months. The hair, dark, matted, and long, fanned out in the water like a halo. Female, the medical examiner confirmed, squatting beside the remains. Probably mid-30s. Not enough soft tissue left for a quick ID. Mara felt her stomach sink. Angela Parr had been 34. A tech pulled something from the tangled kelp near the victim's left hand. A chain necklace, the pendant a small brass fishhook. Ellison had seen it before. Angela's sister had mentioned it in the interview. She never took it off. Said it was for luck. This was her. But as the body was lifted into a black bag, something else came into view, wedged deep between the rocks beneath where her skull had rested. A small rectangle, laminated to protect it from the water. Another postcard. Mara pulled on gloves and eased it free. The image this time was of a gas station at night, the glow of its single pump casting a pale circle on the asphalt. Across the front, in the same red marker, was another message. 2 down. She felt her pulse spike. 2. She flipped it over. On the back, in faint pencil, was a date, August 19th, 21. The problem was, Angela Parr had gone missing on September 2nd, 2 weeks after that date. Which meant the sender hadn't just known she would die, they'd known it before she vanished. Ellison drove straight to the precinct, postcards sealed in an evidence bag. By the time she got to her desk, the me had called again. The skeleton had healed fractures in the ribs and left arm, injuries from months earlier. And the cause of death wasn't drowning. A neat, precise fracture at the base of the skull. Blunt force trauma. The gas station in the postcard wasn't hard to find. Durham County only had 3 still standing from the 1970s, and only one had the same narrow canopy and rust-streaked pump. It sat on Old Harbor Road, a 2-lane strip of cracked asphalt winding toward the marsh. By day it looked abandoned, dust-coated windows, weeds growing through the pavement, a faded sign whose letters had long since fallen. But Mara Ellison knew better. The county records showed the property was still privately owned. Taxes paid every year. Lights came on at night, even though no gas had been sold there in over a decade. When she arrived, the sun was just dipping, staining the horizon with a dull orange. The place looked exactly like the photograph. Same angle, same shadows. The only difference was the pump's glass was now spiderwebbed with cracks. She didn't have to wait long. At 8:43 p.m., the canopy lights blinked on with a faint hum. Mara crouched behind her car, watching. A silver sedan pulled up, its headlights off. The driver didn't get out at first. They just sat there, engine idling. Then the door opened, and a tall man stepped into the circle of light. He wasn't here for gas. There was no fuel to pump. Instead, he opened his trunk and pulled out a plastic-wrapped bundle. He carried it around the back of the station and disappeared into the dark. Ellison followed. Behind the station was nothing but gravel, a few rusting oil drums, and a chain-link fence bordering the marsh. The man was gone, but in the corner of the lot, where the gravel dipped, she saw fresh dirt. A mound about 6 feet long. Her radio was in her hand before she even thought about it. Unit 12, requesting backup at Old Harbor Road, possible burial site. When the floodlights came, the ground gave up its secret. Another body. This one fresher than Angela Parr, days old, not months. But it wasn't the only thing they found. Beneath the body, in a carefully dug cavity, was an old shoebox wrapped in waterproof tape. Inside were photographs, over 100 of them. Every image was taken from a distance, through windows, across parking lots, down crowded streets. Always of women. And in the bottom corner of each photo, in neat red marker, was a number. Counting upward. Angela Parr had been number 57. The woman in the dirt was number 58. The photos from the shoebox covered the entire conference table in the Durham County precinct. Rows and rows of faces stared back, some smiling, some caught mid-step, some framed by the glass of cafe windows. All women. All marked with a neat, red number in the bottom corner. There were no names, no dates, no locations written down. Just a silent parade of potential victims. Mara stood over them, arms crossed, her eyes sweeping from the low numbers, 1, 2, 3, faded with age and clearly taken decades ago, to the more recent ones with sharper color and cleaner focus. Number 1 was a woman in bell-bottom jeans, leaning against a parked van. Number 14 was someone standing at a payphone. Number 27 was looking over her shoulder at a farmer's market. Angela Parr was number 57. The woman from behind the gas station, unidentified, still lying in the morgue, was number 58. Which meant somewhere out there, number 59 might still be alive, or already dead. It was Captain Rhodes who noticed the pattern first. "These aren't random," he said, tapping a stack of prints in the mid-30s. Same background in 4 of them. Looks like a bus terminal. Could be Greyhound on Maple Street. Ellison leaned in. The dates on the Greyhound security footage archive matched, barely. But the realization hit harder than she expected. The killer wasn't stalking a single city. The photos had been taken across 3 counties and more than 25 years. They cross-referenced every missing person report that fit the women in the photos. Out of the first 20 numbers, 9 were confirmed as women who'd vanished without a trace. Most cases had gone cold decades earlier. But then, buried in the middle of the stack, Ellison saw something that made her stop breathing. Number 32. A woman in a white sundress, standing in front of a corner grocery store. Her hair was windblown, her face turned slightly as if she'd heard the click of the shutter. It was Mara's mother. She had disappeared when Mara was 9 years old. And the number in the corner was more than a label, it was a place in the killer's timeline. Rhodes noticed the way she froze. "You okay, detective?" Mara nodded too quickly, sliding the photo into an evidence sleeve. She didn't say a word about who it was. Not yet. Not until she knew. The numbering had a logic. If she could figure out the gaps, who wasn't in the shoebox, she could predict who number 59 might be. That night, alone in her apartment, she laid out the sequence on her floor. Numbers missing. Numbers repeated. And in the middle of the pattern, 2 numbers had been deliberately skipped, 12 and 46. She didn't know it yet, but those missing numbers were the key. And someone, somewhere, was about to send her another postcard. The postcard arrived on a Tuesday. It was postmarked from 2 counties over, the handwriting in the address block neat and deliberate. No return name. No street sender. Just a single smudge of black ink where a fingerprint might have been. The image on the front was a stock photograph of the Durham County Fair, cotton candy stands, the Ferris wheel spinning against a purple sky. But someone had circled a section of the crowd in red pen. When Mara turned the card over, there was only a single line written on the back. "You're running out of time, detective." 59-inch. Her pulse hammered. Whoever had sent it wasn't just taunting her, they were telling her the next number before they killed her. That had never happened before. Rhodes called in a task force. The fairground, thankfully, was still in operation for another 3 days. They scanned the crowd in the circled section of the photo and cross-referenced every visible face against the DMV database. By nightfall, they had a hit. Clara Jensen, 27, a schoolteacher from Briarfield. No criminal record, no known connection to any previous victims. She'd been to the fair that very weekend with friends. Mara and 2 plainclothes officers went to Clara's house the next morning. Clara answered the door with a mug of coffee in hand, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern as Mara explained the situation. "I don't know anyone who'd want to hurt me," Clara said, shaking her head. "And I've never even been to Durham before last weekend." Ellison believed her, which meant the killer had spotted her randomly, another face in a crowd. They convinced Clara to stay at a safe house under police protection. For 2 nights, nothing happened. On the 3rd night, Mara was called to the safe house in the early hours. The lock on the back door had been picked. No forced entry. On the kitchen table, under a single coffee mug, was a photograph. Clara Jensen, taken from the shadows just outside her bedroom window. The number in the corner was already written, 59. But Clara was gone. Rhodes swore under his breath. "We had her under guard." "No," Mara said quietly, staring at the photo. "We had her in a cage. And he came to let her out." Security footage from a neighbor's camera showed a tall figure leading Clara down the driveway at 2:14 a.m. She wasn't struggling. She wasn't bound. She was smiling. The footage looped on Mara's monitor, grainy, black and white, but clear enough to see Clara Jensen stepping barefoot into the cool night. Her hair was loose, her head tilted slightly toward the tall figure beside her. She didn't look afraid. She looked expectant. Mara rewound, slowing the frames. Clara glanced back once toward the safe house. Not toward the 2 officers sleeping in the living room, not toward the street, but toward the dark line of trees beyond the fence. As though she'd been listening for something. The man's face was never visible, always turned away from the camera. But his posture was relaxed, almost casual. Not the hurried stride of an abductor, but the measured pace of someone escorting a guest. It didn't fit the pattern Mara had built in her head. Victims didn't walk willingly into the dark. She pulled up the oldest case file that matched the shoebox photos. #3, Lisa Renard, vanished in 1982. A witness from that case had claimed to see her leaving a bus station with a tall man in a brown coat. At the time, it was dismissed as a likely boyfriend no one had met. Number 14, Monica Hale, last seen walking out of a laundromat. Security footage showed her joining someone in the parking lot without hesitation. Number 27, number 35, hashtag 41. The list grew. It hit her then. At least a third of the numbered women weren't snatched. They chose to leave with him. For what? Rhodes joined her at the table, rubbing his eyes. You're saying they went willingly? Yes. She pointed to the common threads. No sign of struggle. No witnesses reporting screaming. No broken locks. They were lured. By what? Money? Blackmail? Mara shook her head. Something else. Something he said. She dug into the missing person interviews. Friends and family had sometimes mentioned strange behavior in the days before each disappearance, acting distracted, receiving calls from unknown numbers, telling people they were going to meet someone without elaborating. That brought her back to Clara. If they could trace who called her in the 72 hours before the abduction, maybe they'd get a lead. But Clara's phone logs were wiped clean. Not just deleted, factory reset at 2:23 a.m., exactly 9 minutes after she walked out of the safe house. That meant the killer had her phone in his possession, and he knew enough to erase it before they could even start looking. Mara's desk phone rang then, slicing through the silence. The pause. Then a voice. You think you understand, detective. But you don't. They all wanted to come with me. And one day, so will you. The line went dead.